The first flakes of winter had arrived quietly, descending like pale whispers from a gray sky. In the small town of Crestfall, nestled between the rugged mountains and dense forests, snow was not unusual, but it was always transformative. The streets that had carried laughter and the clatter of daily life were now muffled under a soft white blanket. The air smelled of frozen pine and wet stone, and every step in the fresh snow crunched with an almost musical precision. Samantha Cross watched it all from the frosted window of her family's modest cabin. Her hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, steam curling upward like the last sighs of warmth. The town had gone quiet. Most people preferred to hibernate in the warmth of their homes, shutting the world out until spring. But Samantha wasn't like most people. She had always found herself drawn to the forest, to the cold and the wind, as if the earth itself whispered secrets she could only hear. Her father had often warned her about wandering too far, especially in winter. The snow doesn't just hide the paths, he would say. It hides danger. But that warning, like so many, had always felt like a challenge to her rather than a caution. She wasn't afraid of danger, at least not in the way others were. She had grown up in these mountains, running trails where the trees bent low with snow and the streams had already begun to freeze, and she knew the land like the lines of her own hands. Still, there were whispers in her mind tonight, a prickle of unease she couldn't shake, and then she heard it. A sound unlike the gentle hush of snow falling, a cry, sharp and fragmented, carried by the wind. Samantha's heart skipped. She set down her mug, its warmth cooling on the windowsill, and pulled on her thick coat and boots without hesitation. The snow had already begun to accumulate heavily, muffling sounds and making distance seem deceiving. She stepped outside, feeling the cold bite through her gloves, and followed the noise into the forest that bordered her home. The trees were silent witnesses, their branches bending under the weight of snow, occasionally shaking flakes onto her shoulders. Every step was a struggle. The powder was soft but deep, hiding rocks and roots that could twist an ankle in an instant. The cry came again, clearer this time, a ragged plea that sent a shiver down her spine. It sounded human, and instinctively, Samantha's pace quickened. She didn't know who she might find, but the sound demanded action. Half an hour later, she stumbled over a fallen branch and caught sight of him. He was lying on the ground, his coat soaked, face pale under a dusting of snow. He was young, maybe 20, though the wind had beaten him enough to make his features hard to read. His eyes fluttered open, revealing a strange mix of fear and relief. "Please, help," he rasped. Samantha knelt beside him, checking for broken bones. He was shivering violently, and his lips were a shade too blue. "You're going to be okay," she said firmly, though part of her knew that words alone would not save him. "Can you stand?" He tried, but his knees buckled under him. Frost had begun to claim him, and the snow around his body had started to cling like a suffocating blanket. Samantha looked around, knowing the nearest road was still at least a mile away through treacherous terrain. Carrying him was the only option. Her stomach tightened at the thought, but she had faced impossible challenges before. This was just another. "Hold on to me," she said, slipping her arms beneath his back. "I'm going to carry you." He hesitated, embarrassment and pride warring with his desperation. But when he tried to protest further, another shiver shook his body, and she shook her head. "No arguing. You're too weak. I won't let you die out here." It took every ounce of her strength to lift him. The snow resisted, sucking at her boots, but she gritted her teeth and stepped forward. One foot in front of the other, step by step, she made her way through the forest, each movement measured and deliberate. The boy groaned softly with pain, his head resting against her shoulder, and she felt his warmth, or what little warmth he had left, radiating weakly through the layers of her coat. The journey was grueling. Branches whipped at her face, the wind tried to steal her breath, and the cold gnawed at her muscles. Yet, Samantha refused to stop. She had carried logs heavier than this across the forest, In the middle of winter, she could carry him. She could and she would. Every fiber of her being screamed with determination, even as exhaustion threatened to betray her. Eventually, the faint outline of the town appeared, blurred and shivering under a veil of snow. Samantha's boots ached, her arms trembled, and frost had begun to form on her eyelashes. But relief surged as she saw the first lights flickering through the trees, the warmth of human habitation waiting at the edge of the forest. She adjusted her grip on the boy, careful not to jostle him too much, and pushed forward with what remained of her energy. A neighbor, Mr. Harlan, emerged from his house just as Samantha reached the edge of the forest. His eyes widened at the sight of her carrying the young man. "By God, Samantha, what—" "Help him," she gasped, dropping to her knees as she set the boy down. "He's nearly frozen. Get him inside. Quick!" Mr. Harlan didn't need more urging. With Samantha's directions, he carried the boy into his warm cabin. Blankets were draped over him, and a fire was stoked immediately. Samantha watched from the doorway, her chest heaving, sweat and snow melting into one salty mixture on her skin. She felt a strange cocktail of triumph and terror. She had done it. She had brought him through the snow when no one else would. The boy's eyes fluttered open again, this time more clearly. I thought, he started, his voice trembling. Samantha knelt beside him, brushing snow from his hair. "You thought no one would come?" she guessed. He nodded weakly, and she offered the faintest of smiles. "Then you were wrong. I did." Outside, the snow continued to fall, relentless and unfeeling, blanketing the world in white. Inside, a small warmth lingered, a spark of human perseverance and connection. Samantha realized then that the snow, though cold and merciless, could not stop someone who refused to yield. Not when she was willing to carry someone through it, step by frozen step. And as the fire crackled and the boy began to regain some color, Samantha felt the weight of the ordeal settle on her shoulders, not just the physical weight, but the moral one. She had acted when others had looked away. She had chosen to be the one who moved through the storm when everyone else stayed behind. And somehow, she knew this was only the beginning. The snow outside was endless, but inside hope had taken root. The fire's warmth was almost unbearable after the endless cold, but Samantha welcomed it like a long-lost friend. She sank onto a chair beside the small hearth, rubbing her arms as she tried to thaw the snow and ice that had formed on her coat and boots. Across the room, the boy, whose name she had just learned was Daniel, lay wrapped in blankets, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. He was alive, but barely. The realization pressed down on Saman. The harder than the snow-laden forest she had crossed. Mr. Harlan bustled around, offering blankets, scalding cups of tea, and cautious glances at the girl who had, by sheer determination, carried a nearly lifeless young man through half a mile of snow. "You're something else, Samantha," he muttered, shaking his head. "Most folks wouldn't have even thought to go out there, least of all alone." Samantha only shrugged, her fingers drumming absently against the wooden arm of the chair. "He would have died," she said simply, the words heavy with conviction. I couldn't let him die. There was more to it than heroism, though even she wasn't fully aware of why she had moved so quickly, acted so decisively. Something about Daniel's vulnerability, the fragility of life in that frozen forest, had struck a chord in her, an echo from her own past. She had lost people before, loved ones swallowed by accidents, illnesses, careless mistakes. Perhaps in carrying him, she had been trying to carry them too, in a way only the living could. Daniel's eyes fluttered open again, and this time he could focus. He scanned the room slowly, noticing the fire, the cabin, and then Samantha. Relief, gratitude, and lingering fear warred across his face. He tried to sit up but faltered, and Samantha reached over instinctively to steady him. "Easy," she said gently. "You don't have to do anything yet." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Why did you—" He trailed off, unable to The question fully. Why did I carry you? Samantha supplied. Because no one else would. That's it. No mystery, no heroics. Just, someone had to. Daniel swallowed hard, the words sinking in deeper than either of them expected. My friends, they said I was being stupid, that I could make it alone. His lips trembled, and for the first time Samantha noticed how thin he had become, how the snow had already begun to steal away his strength. I thought I could, but I was wrong. You're alive, Samantha reminded him softly. That's what matters. The room was quiet after that, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire and the occasional wind gust rattling against the cabin walls. Samantha watched Daniel's chest rise and fall, his eyes closing as exhaustion claimed him again. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but words felt hollow in the face of the enormity of the day. She simply sat there, letting the fire chase away some of the frost that clung to her body and her thoughts. Hours later, when the fire had dimmed to glowing embers, Daniel stirred again, this time with enough strength to sit upright. He looked at Samantha with an intensity that unsettled her. I need to tell you something, he said slowly. Something I wasn't supposed to be out there. Samantha's heart sank slightly. She had feared as much. The forest, the snow, the isolation. It wasn't an accident. There was a reason he had been out there, alone, in conditions that could have killed him. She nodded, encouraging him without pressuring. Then tell me, she said simply. I can handle it. Daniel's gaze dropped to his hands. I was running, he admitted finally. From everything. From my family, from the people I knew, from the mistakes I made. I thought the snow would hide me. Or maybe it would end it all. Samantha's chest tightened. She had guessed fear, but not despair this deep. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile the boy she had carried through the snow with the one now confessing the weight of his life on her small living room table. Yet even in her own fear and anger, fear for him, anger at the recklessness, she felt the same instinct she had when she found him. She could not let him be swallowed by this storm. Not tonight, not ever. You don't have to do it alone anymore, she said softly, the words firm as ice yet warm as fire. You're here, you're alive, and you're not going anywhere until you're ready. He nodded, swallowing hard, tears mingling with frost on his cheeks. I don't deserve. You do, Samantha interrupted gently. You survived. That's enough for now. Tomorrow we deal with everything else. The night stretched on. Outside, the storm had grown heavier, the snow falling so thick it seemed to erase the edges of the world. Samantha thought about the forest she had crossed, the weight of Daniel in her arms, and the small, flickering light of human warmth inside the cabin. Survival wasn't just about escaping the snow or enduring the cold. It was about choice, about refusing to give up even when every muscle screamed against it. She had chosen to carry him. That was the first act of survival. The next would be keeping him alive until the storm passed. Morning arrived pale and gray. The snow had piled high against the windows, drifts rising like walls. Daniel's condition had stabilized but remained fragile. Samantha roused herself early, helping him sit upright and sip water. Each movement was careful, deliberate. The forest would still be dangerous, the roads treacherous. If he hoped to leave Crestfall anytime soon, they would need a plan. And the weight of the plan rested on Samantha's shoulders, almost as much as Daniel's physical weight had the day before. You're strong, he said suddenly, looking at her with an odd mix of admiration and fear. I don't know how you did it. I couldn't even stand, and you, his voice faltered. I had to, she said simply, and I can do it again if I have to. I'm not afraid of snow, of cold, of anything. Not when someone needs me. There was a silence that followed, not awkward, but heavy with understanding. They both knew that what had started as a chance encounter in the forest was becoming something more, a bond forged in desperation, in the act of carrying another human being through impossible conditions. It was raw and frightening, and for both of them, entirely necessary. By noon, the storm had eased slightly, but the snow was still deep. Samantha helped Daniel to his feet, supporting more of his weight than he could bear on his own. Every step through the packed drifts was a reminder of the journey they had begun the night before. They would need to reach the main road, contact authorities, and ensure Daniel's family knew he was alive. And beyond that, beyond survival, there was a deeper question neither of them had yet faced. How do you move forward after being carried through the snow when no one else would? Samantha didn't have the answer, but she knew this. They would face it together, step by frozen step. Through the relentless winter, she would carry him again if she had to. And he, somehow, would learn to lean on her without fear, without shame, without the cold claiming him again. Outside, the forest seemed endless, white and indifferent, but inside them burned something stronger than frostbite, stronger than despair, a stubborn spark of life, courage, and the unspoken promise that neither would give up. And so, they set out once more, not alone, not afraid, together. The snow was no longer gentle by the time Samantha and Daniel stepped out into the forest again. It had transformed from delicate flakes into thick, wet layers that clung to everything. Every branch sagged with the weight of it, and every step sank into the deep drifts, threatening to swallow their boots. Samantha had insisted on leaving the cabin early. Waiting too long in one place, she knew, was as dangerous as wandering blindly. Frost could clay a body in hours if it was careless. And Daniel, still weak from the previous night, could ill afford mistakes. She adjusted the straps of her backpack, which held blankets, water, and a small supply of food. Daniel followed closely, shuffling through the snow like a wounded animal. Every step was slow and careful. Samantha kept her hand lightly on his shoulder, not only to guide him but to remind him he wasn't alone. The silence between them was heavy but necessary. Words were luxury they couldn't afford while navigating treacherous terrain. They had barely gone a mile when the first real obstacle appeared, a frozen stream, partially covered by snow, with jagged ice sheets breaking unevenly beneath the surface. Samantha froze, scanning the area. "We can't cross it by stepping on the ice. It won't hold your weight," she said. "We need to find another way." Daniel looked down at the slick surface, shivering not just from cold but from fear. "Can you carry me again?" he asked quietly. His voice was almost a whisper, and Samantha felt a pang of both responsibility and worry. He had regained some strength, but not enough to risk a fall into the icy water below. Samantha squared her shoulders and nodded. "Yes, again." He hesitated, ashamed. I hate needing this." "You don't get to hate it right now. You get to survive," she replied firmly. She bent down, slid her arms under him, and lifted him against her chest. The icy wind cut into her face, but she ignored it, focusing on on the rhythm of her steps. Snow gave way beneath her boots as she stepped carefully across the edge of the stream, testing the ground before each weight-bearing step. It felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Finally, she reached solid ground. Her arms trembled, her lungs burned from exertion, but Daniel was safe. She set him down gently, brushing snow from his hair. "See? We made it," she said, forcing a smile. Daniel managed a weak nod. I couldn't have done that," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "You would have tried," Samantha said, "and that counts for something. But we don't need to try alone." They pressed on, the forest growing denser and darker as the day wore on. Snow muffled every sound, but they knew the dangers lurked all around, hidden crevices, thin ice, and the ever-present threat of exhaustion. Daniel began to stumble more frequently, his legs shaky from both fear and fatigue. Samantha's grip on him became more than just guidance. It became literal support. She would steady him with one arm, sometimes even letting him rest partially on her as they moved slowly but steadily forward. Hours passed. Their progress was agonizingly slow. The sun hung low, a pale disk behind gray clouds, offering no warmth. Samantha realized that if they didn't find shelter soon, they might have to survive the night exposed. Snow in the mountains was merciless. Hypothermia could strike in minutes if one's strength faltered. She scanned the trees desperately. There she finally said, pointing toward a thicket where the snow had piled against a rocky outcrop. "We can make camp there." Daniel looked skeptical. "It's just rocks and snow." "It's shelter," Samantha said, moving forward to start clearing a small area. Better than being out in the open. Together, they dug into the snow, creating a shallow trench and using branches to build a crude windbreak. It wasn't much, but it would provide some protection. Samantha draped a blanket over them both, rubbing Daniel's hands until the color returned. She had learned in her years of surviving winter that small things, a dry blanket, a bit of warmth against the wind, could mean the difference between life and death. They shared the remaining water and a small portion of food, eating in silence, conserving energy. Samantha kept one eye on the dimming forest, alert to every sound, the distant cracking of ice, the occasional snap of a branch under snow, the eerie silence of the snow-covered world. She realized that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about awareness, patience, and refusing to surrender to fear. Daniel's gaze drifted to her, hesitant but searching. You keep going," he said, "even when you're tired, even when it's impossible. How do you do it?" Samantha looked at him, her face streaked with snow and sweat. "I don't stop because it's impossible. I stop when I can't do it anymore, and I'm not at that point yet." She hesitated. "Besides, someone has to carry the weight. Tonight, it's you. Tomorrow, it might be me. That's how it works." Daniel nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. The fear that had paralyzed him was still there, but it was tempered by trust. Trust in her, trust in himself, and trust in the fragile rhythm they had created together. For the first time, he realized that survival was not just a fight against nature, but a fight for connection, for human support, and for the courage to keep moving forward even when the world seemed indifferent. Night fell fully, dark and oppressive. The wind moaned through the trees, and the temperature plummeted. Samantha kept Daniel close, monitoring him for signs of frostbite, whispering encouragements whenever his shivers became too violent. Every so often she would shift, taking the cold on herself to give him the advantage, just as she had done the night she carried him through the forest. Hours passed slowly, and exhaustion threatened to pull them both under. Daniel drifted into a fitful sleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Samantha remained awake, her eyes scanning the forest, alert for predators, hidden ice, or any sudden dangers. Her body ached, her muscles protested, but her mind refused to yield. By the time the first hints of dawn lightened the sky, Samantha had made a silent vow. She would not let the winter claim him. She had carried him through the snow once, and she would do it again if necessary. Every step, every decision, every ounce of strength she possessed was dedicated to keeping him alive. As the sun broke over the horizon, painting the world in muted golds and whites, Samantha helped Daniel to his feet once more. The forest stretched endlessly ahead, unforgiving and relentless, but they were no longer merely two people fighting against snow and cold. They were a team, bound by necessity, resilience, and the unspoken promise that neither would leave the other behind. And so they continued, moving deeper into the heart of winter, where every step was a challenge, every breath a victory, and every moment together a testament to human endurance. The snow might be endless, but so was their determination. The forest had become a maze of white and gray, endless snow stretching in every direction, trees weighed down by ice, and the cold pressing in like a living thing. Samantha and Daniel moved cautiously, every step measured, every sound scrutinized. The exhaustion that had been a whisper yesterday was now a roaring companion. Daniel's muscles trembled, and Samantha's back and arms burned from supporting him through the treacherous terrain. Yet neither dared stop for long. The snow hid dangers, thin ice, sudden drop-offs, and patches where the ground gave way. By mid-morning, the first real crisis of the day struck. As they navigated a steep incline, Daniel's boot slipped on a patch of ice concealed beneath fresh snow. He tumbled forward, his arm scraping against a tree, a sharp pain shooting through his shoulder. Samantha caught him before he could fall fully, but he cried out, clutching his arm. "Damn it," he muttered through gritted teeth. I can't do this anymore." "You can," Samantha said firmly. Her own muscles ached, but fear lent her strength. "You're stronger than you think, but we have to rest, just for a few minutes." She guided him to a small outcropping of rocks, using her body to shield him from the wind as best she could. They sat there silently for a moment, Samantha checking his arm. It was swollen but thankfully not broken. Still, the strain of carrying him, or even supporting him through snow, was obvious. Samantha's mind raced. Every mile they traversed increased the risk of frostbite, exhaustion, or injury, yet stopping for long meant exposure. She weighed their options, the cold gnawing at her logic. "We need to keep moving," she finally decided. "Shelter isn't far. We can make it." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't know if I can. My legs. They won't hold me." "You will," she insisted, "and if they don't, I'll carry you again. I'll do whatever it takes." The words seemed to revive him, if only slightly. He stood, wobbling, and leaned heavily on her shoulder as they continued. Every step was agony. The snow sucked at their boots, and the wind bit at their faces. At one point, Samantha tripped, almost losing her footing, and Daniel reached to steady her. For a fleeting moment, the roles reversed. He was supporting her, even as she bore the brunt of his weight most of the time. Hours passed. The terrain worsened, the snow deepened into ankle and then knee-deep drifts, slowing their progress to a crawl. Samantha's arms screamed with every step she took while supporting Daniel. The reality of their situation, trapped in an indifferent forest with a storm that showed no mercy, pressed down on them. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and their water had run low. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, shadows stretched across the forest floor, turning the snow into a pale, deceptive abyss. Samantha spotted a faint structure through the trees, an abandoned cabin, half buried by snow. Relief surged through her. "There," she said, pointing. "That's our stop for tonight." Daniel's legs buckled, and Samantha caught him without hesitation. "I've got you," she murmured. She could feel his exhaustion radiating through her, a physical weight almost as heavy as the snow-laden forest itself, but she didn't waver. Step by step she carried him, every muscle straining, until they reached the cabin. The door groaned as Samantha pushed it open. Inside, dust and frost coated every surface, but it was a sanctuary compared to the howling wind outside. They collapsed inside, Samantha sitting heavily against the wall, Daniel sinking into a corner near the small fireplace. There was no firewood, but at least they were sheltered from the worst of the storm. Samantha knelt beside him, assessing his condition. His arms shook, his legs were numb, and his lips were tinged blue. "You were lucky," she said quietly. "Not everyone makes it this far." He managed a faint smile. "I'm alive because of you." "Don't thank me yet," Samantha replied. "We still have a long way to go." Night fell quickly. The cabin was cold, and the silence was oppressive. They huddled together under the thin blankets they had brought, drawing what warmth they could from each other. Samantha kept watch, listening for signs of shifting snow or falling trees, conscious that their shelter was fragile and the storm was relentless. Hours into the night, Daniel whispered suddenly, breaking the tense quiet. "Samantha, I never told anyone about what I did. About why I ran." Samantha turned to him, sensing the vulnerability in his voice. You don't have to tell me, not if it's too hard. It's not too hard, he said, swallowing. It's just, I'm scared you'll think less of me. I ran from everyone, from my family, from the mistakes I made. I thought I could escape them in the snow, but I was wrong. I nearly died. Samantha placed a hand on his arm, firm and grounding. You survived, she said, and survival doesn't care about mistakes. It cares about what you do to keep going. He nodded, tears mingling with the frost on his cheeks. You carried me through the snow when no one else would. Samantha felt the weight of the words, the significance of what she had done. It wasn't just a physical act. It was a promise, a bond. She realized in that cold, abandoned cabin that survival was not a solitary thing. It required trust, sacrifice, and sometimes carrying someone else when they couldn't carry themselves. Morning brought no relief. The storm raged outside, snow piling against the cabin walls. Samantha and Daniel rationed the last of their water and food, knowing they couldn't wait for rescue indefinitely. They had to move again. Helping Daniel to his feet was even harder than the day before. His legs shook violently, his energy near exhaustion. Samantha wrapped an arm around him, supporting more of his weight than she had before. Every step was a struggle, but neither wavered. Step by step, they pushed forward into the blinding snow, their path uncertain, their bodies screaming in protest, their spirits driven only by the stubborn will to survive. By mid-morning, Samantha realized that Daniel's condition was deteriorating faster than she had anticipated. Frostbite had begun to set in on his fingers and toes, and his lips were turning pale again. Panic threatened to claw at her composure, but she forced herself to focus. They needed shelter, and fast. Every ounce of strength she possessed would have to be doubled, tripled, even quadrupled if she was going to carry him through another night. And she would. She had done it once. She would do it again, because when no one else would, she carried him through the snow. The storm had reached its relentless crescendo. The world outside the cabin had vanished beneath a wall of white, snow whipping horizontally, blinding and biting at any exposed skin. Samantha could barely see 5 feet ahead, but she knew they could not remain there. Daniel's condition was worsening by the hour. His legs were weak, his fingers swollen and numb, and frost had begun to creep along his cheeks. If they stayed, the snow and cold would claim him. If they moved, every step was a gamble with death itself. Samantha took a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs, and she made her decision. We're leaving, she said firmly. I'll carry you, step by step. I won't let the snow win. Daniel shook his head weakly. I can't. I'll slow you down. You don't have to. I do, Samantha interrupted, her voice ironclad. I don't care about slow. I don't care about pain. You're coming with me, alive. Do you understand? He nodded, too exhausted to argue, and allowed her to slide her arms beneath him. He was lighter than he had been the day before, fragile like a winter bird, yet every ounce of him carried the weight of their struggle, the nights of near death, the fear, the trust, the bond that had grown between them. Samantha adjusted him carefully against her chest, bracing herself against the storm. The first steps were the hardest. Snow clung to her boots, sucked at her legs, and wind cut at her face with icy knives. Each movement was agony. Her muscles screamed in protest, her lungs burned, and yet she pushed forward. Step by step she moved, carrying not just Daniel, but the culmination of fear, hope, and the raw human will to survive. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time had lost meaning beneath the endless white. Daniel murmured occasionally, barely coherent, but Samantha pressed on, speaking to him in fragments of encouragement. You're strong. You can do this. Keep your eyes on me, just one step at a time. At one point, a hidden crevasse revealed itself beneath the snow, a gaping maw that could have swallowed them both. Samantha froze, feeling the ground tremble beneath her boots. She carefully shifted Daniel's weight, testing the snow before each step, moving around the deadly trap like a dancer on a frozen stage. The storm roared, as if mocking their persistence, but she refused to yield. By late afternoon, exhaustion had nearly consumed her. Her muscles quivered with fatigue, her breath came in ragged gasps, and her hands were raw from gripping Daniel. Yet the edge of the forest appeared through the blizzard, a faint shimmer of hope against the white chaos. Civilization was close, rescue was near. With the last reserve of her strength, Samantha pushed forward, the final few hundred feet a battle against gravity, snow, and sheer exhaustion. She stumbled once, almost letting Daniel slip, but a surge of adrenaline carried her forward. Each step was a victory, each breath a defiance, against the winter that had threatened to claim them both. Finally, through the storm, lights appeared, dim, flickering, but unmistakable. The main road, a path through the snow where other survivors and townsfolk could reach them, was near. Samantha allowed herself a brief surge of relief. She had done it. She had carried him through the snow, through impossible odds, and he was still alive. As they reached the road, a snowplow emerged through the blizzard, its lights cutting through the storm. Rescue workers jumped out, rushing toward them with blankets, hot drinks, and warmth that seemed almost miraculous after the relentless cold. Samantha lowered Daniel into their care, her body collapsing against the snow-covered ground, muscles spent beyond recovery. Daniel's eyes met hers, filled with gratitude and awe. You did it! You saved me!" "No," Samantha said, shaking her head, a weary smile breaking across her face. "We did it. We survived, together." The warmth of the rescuers wrapped around them, blankets draped over shivering shoulders, hot drinks pressed into hands that had grown numb beyond recognition. Samantha's exhaustion was absolute, yet she could feel something else stirring beneath it, pride, relief, and a bond forged in snow and endurance that would never break. As they were lifted onto a stretcher and carried to safety, Daniel reached out, gripping Samantha's hand weakly. I owe you my life," he whispered. "You owe me nothing," she said softly. "You survived because you kept going, because you trusted me. That's all that matters." In the warmth of the rescue vehicle, as the snow continued to fall outside in an indifferent fury, Samantha finally allowed herself to rest. The storm had been relentless, the forest unforgiving, and yet they had emerged alive. She thought of every step, every slip, every aching muscle, and knew that the choice to act, to carry, to refuse to abandon another human being had made all the difference. Daniel's breathing steadied, his color returning as the blankets and heat worked their magic. He looked at Samantha, a mixture of awe and gratitude in his eyes. I'll never forget this. Never," she smiled faintly. "Then don't. Remember it. Remember that someone will carry you through the storm, and sometimes that someone is me." Outside, the snow fell endlessly, a white testament to winter's fury. Inside, warmth and life prevailed. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the brink, and yet they had endured. Samantha had carried him through the snow when no one else would, and in doing so they had discovered something beyond survival, courage, trust, and the unspoken promise that they would face whatever storms came next, together. As the vehicle moved toward the safety of the town, Samantha looked out the window at the white world. The snow was relentless, unforgiving, and beautiful all at once, and she knew, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, that no matter how deep, how cold, or how impossible the snow seemed, she would carry someone through it again if she had to. Because that was who she was, and that was what it meant to survive, and to save another human being. The storm had broken. They had not. And more stories will keep coming. So please don't forget to like and subscribe. Heart of Winter, hope endured.